Hello friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. We're going to be taking a look at the new moon that's coming up just this evening, and it's another powerful new moon, absolutely powerful. So we'll be talking about all the outer planet energies that are signaled and highlighted in this new moon, and that's the main thing we want to talk about. So let's go ahead and bring the chart up. See, we have to go over here. Okay, you should be able to see the chart at this point. And of course you can see the sun and moon together at 15 degrees and 48 minutes of Libra. It's kind of nice that the new moon is in Libra. It makes me feel very comfortable and familiar because Libra is such a kind of a familiar and diplomatic sign. Although this particular time it's also squared Pluto, which is more of a Scorpio kind of a new moon because of the Pluto. And it's also ruled by a retrograde Venus in Scorpio. So we may not have that friendly of a new moon as we might normally think of a new moon that's a Libra new moon. It is right at the 15-degree mark of Libra, so right square in the middle of Libra. And what else? Well, in general terms, I think we need to talk about the fact that all of the outer planets are signaled, or highlighted rather, in this new moon. We already mentioned how close this square is. I mean, the fact that it's a square makes it even stronger than if it was an inconjunct or a semi-sextile, some other angle. And the fact that this is 18 degrees and 46 minutes, Pluto, and the new moon itself is 48 minutes. We're right on 3 degrees separation. That's a powerful square. That's pretty close. 2 degrees would be like even closer, but still 3 is pretty close. So we're looking at a very Plutonic time, a very Plutonian time, going into this next cycle of 30 days. And remember, we're coming off a cycle of 30 days that also had strong Pluto, and had strong Neptune, and had strong Uranus. So taking a look at these others, well, of course, remember that Neptune is still at the middle degree of almost the same degree, about a degree different, in Pisces, and that's not going to be one of those really strong angles like an opposition or a square, but still, it's a very close inconjunct. We're talking about 1.5 degrees of an inconjunct between the new moon and Neptune, so we definitely have some Neptunian energy running around. And just to identify that, we can say that there is that fake news kind of symbolism that's in the current zeitgeist. The question that came up last week, which of course in this country was a very, very powerful debate over the truth, over which is the truth. Does this very credible woman who is saying that she was sexually assaulted when she was 15, and the candidate for the Supreme Court, Kavanaugh, was I think 17 at the time. It goes back to a long time ago. And then of course he denies it. So where is the truth lie? And of course the Republicans were really, really anxious to get this through. The Democrats not so much. The Republicans were saying, well, who are you going to believe? It's he said, she said, and so we just have to just decide what we want. She seems like she's telling the truth, but on the other hand, Judge Kavanaugh denies it. So that was their response. And the response of the Democrats was, well, if one of them is telling the truth and she seems very credible and the FBI can corroborate, and there's a lot of witnesses that came forward, then he kind of must be not telling the truth. Only one can be telling the truth, but that didn't stop the Republicans, who said, no, truth is relative, fake news. We think that Judge Kavanaugh was just as credible a witness. So those are the opposing points of view on this. I bring it out not to mention politics so much, although I do have a liberal bias, but I'm not bringing that bias forward. I'm bringing instead what do we have in the zeitgeist and what do we have in the stars that really kind of correspond. And certainly the Neptunian factor is with us in terms of our own idealism, in terms of taking a spiritual high road, which is part of Neptune, in terms of looking into whether there's actual deception or self-deception involved in our dealings with other people. And our dealings with other people are very important right now in the stars, as we read it in the stars, because we have retrograde Venus in Scorpio, which means looking under the covers of all of our relationship motivation, which sounds a theme from last week, obviously. And Venus is in fact applying to a square to Mars. Mars at 9 degrees, 23 minutes, Venus at 10 degrees, so and moving backwards. So as Mars is moving forward, so they are both moving toward each other. Why we call it an applying square between Mars, ruler of Scorpio, and Venus sitting in Mars's sign of Scorpio. So we have a very definite relationship thing going on this whole month. Venus will move backwards through the sign of Scorpio until it gets all the way to the very beginning of Scorpio, crosses back into Libra, where you see Mercury right now at the 29th degree or 28th degree of Libra, and then it will turn around and go direct again on November 16th. Now meanwhile, as it moves backward, we know that the Sun will be moving forward. And as the Sun gets closer and closer to Venus, Venus disappears from the evening sky. Why do we know that Venus is the evening star? Because were this to be not the 8th house cusp, but the actual horizon that my mouse is moving back and forth over, the Sun would be down. Venus would still be able to be seen on the western horizon as the Sun is setting. So that makes it an evening star, but that will change because as the Sun moves closer and Venus moves closer to the Sun, also moving toward each other, there will come a time when we can't see Venus anymore. Venus will be lost in the rays of the Sun. Under the beams is one way of calling it. And then as the Sun continues to move on, it will get to a point where it is 10 degrees away from Venus, and Venus is right at the very border between Scorpio and Libra, but on the Libra side. And that will be the heliacal rise of Venus as the morning star. And when that happens, which is, as I say, around November 1st, Venus will be in Libra. It'll be in the tail end of Libra moving backwards, and we call that a Libra cycle for 584 days of Venus, the synodic cycle with the Sun, indicated as a starting point by that heliacal rise when Venus first comes as the morning star and spends a lot of time in that phase and then moves on to other phases as it goes through its cycles. As it goes through its long 584-degree cycle, as it goes through the phases of its cycles, I should say. And so we have a Libra Venus coming up, but right now we have a Scorpio Venus, the tail end of a Scorpio Venus. Not that Venus was in Scorpio 584 days ago, I'm not saying that. But we have Venus in Scorpio right now moving retrograde. And so I think it's a very interesting time. I was actually surprised to see everything get settled so quickly last week. I thought there was going to be more controversy surrounding these accusations of sexual misconduct. And what we may be seeing is the repercussion from that will continue. And there will be further talk about what happened last week and how the sexual misconduct charges were kind of quickly dismissed. Some would say too quickly. That could still be an issue as we head towards November and the November elections here in this country. So we'll see what happens. It'll be good to keep an eye on that. And I believe it'll be very important to keep an eye on what our own motivations are in our relationship with each other. How do we do relationship in our lives? How do we conduct it, and what are the underlying characteristics of that? How do we do partnership? So those things are going to be coming up, as is also very appropriate with the new moon being in the Libra sign, which is the sign of partnership. So this combination of factors here with Venus square Mars, Venus in Scorpio, moving retrograde, and the Libra new moon, that's all very interesting. And to get back to the outer planet connections, as we say, there is Pluto, there is Neptune, and by George, there's even a pretty good dose of Uranus as well, because if we look at the parallels with Uranus, we see that it's contraparallel to Mercury at 11 degrees and 20 minutes, a positive direction of declination of 11.3. And if we look at, on the other hand, Mercury, that's 11 degrees, 18 minutes, so very, very close to a perfect, we call this an exact parallel between between Mercury and Uranus. And in fact, they're also opposite each other, about 3 degrees opposite each other. So that is a pretty good dose of Uranus, especially in the mental realm. So we're going to be spending a lot of time dealing with our intuition, dealing with our realizations that come, sudden realizations that come because of events that come that are surprising events, and kind of trigger epiphanies. This is a time of epiphanies with Uranus so stimulated, especially involved with Mercury. And we have all three outer planets, once again, in this configuration, very powerful, and just an indication that we're living through very important times. You know, these are times of great change in this country, all over the world for that matter. I'm much more familiar with the American political scene. And we could just say that this election coming up at the end of this cycle, the next new moon is November 6th, the day of the election. So this is a very powerful time, and a time when no doubt many people, more people than usual at the midterms, will be motivated to vote and to stand up for themselves and to say, this is what I believe, this is what I can vote my conscience for, this is what I want to see happen. I'm going to be able to articulate that, and I'm going to be able to act upon it. And that's the message of this new planet Eurus. The other thing to note about this new moon that's quite interesting is that Eurus too is stimulated in this configuration in an unusual way. Jupiter has been moving closer and closer to being a perfect 150-degree aspect, and now you can see Jupiter at 23 degrees as a perfect partile, we call it 150-degree or in conjunct aspect to Eris. Feminine warrior for soul intention, really a marker for standing up for oneself, being a maverick if necessary, going against the grain, swimming upstream like the salmon to spawn. You see it over and over again in charts after chart. I've got plenty of research on this topic. In fact, I brought the book with me just to show you. So I believe you can see the book. And that's the book I wrote called The 10th Planet, which is actually doing well. It's got legs. People have found that it's very accurate as far as this characterization, and I don't take credit for it. It just is part of the zeitgeist right now that Eris is coming to the fore, and I was able to note what the symbolism seemed to be to me, and then by doing all this research I was able to kind of prove it out, that it is a feminine warrior archetype. It's not the same as a masculine warrior, and I talk about that distinction in the book. Feminine warrior fights for what they most deeply believe. It's what they cannot not do. And when they discover it, it is a great benefit, because it's just like Joseph Campbell was fond of saying, follow your bliss. In other words, do what you love, the money will follow. Don't worry about how you're going to get by. Just worry about what you need to do. What is your own calling? What is your calling? Follow your calling. So I think that's so fascinating that it's prominent right now. It's prominent also in the chart of the United States, if you look at the transits there. And, you know, sure enough, both political parties in this country are calling out to their proponents and to the people that are wavering in one direction or the other. And they're saying, hey, it's time to stand up and be counted. This is the moment. Everybody come forward. It's a really big moment for our country. We need to vote. We need to establish what we believe and stand up for it, stick to it. And you'll see protests. You'll see a lot of activity leading up to this election, and a lot of activity on the part of survivors of sexual abuse that feel shortchanged by the quickness of the process last week, where sort of a token FBI investigation didn't interview hardly any witnesses. And so that does seem like a slight to the person that brought the charges forward and to other women that were ready to testify as far as corroborating that. So anyway, that's what we got going in the country, and we can see it reflected in the stars, which I think is so powerful and so interesting. And in honor of the relationship situation, which is so much part of the October astrology, we put our relationship add-on interpretations on sale. So if you already have time passages, you can get interpretations for how a relationship works out. To give you a very brief demonstration of that, I'll just have to bring up an actual personal chart. I don't really have anybody that I don't know if I have Sheila E., who is actually with Prince or not, but I'll just have to bring up. I'm not really prepared to do this. You can tell. I'll bring up Prince and Barbara Boxer just for fun. Barbara, I hope that suits you. And so, looking at Prince's chart, we would want to display comparisons. And then we'd see the two charts together as soon as we pick one. And here we go, Barbara. Well, I was going to bring her up, but I don't know exactly where to see. I think we'll find Barbara in here. There we go. Well, I'm just going to bring up somebody random because it doesn't matter, does it? So here we have the comparison chart between the two. What I really wanted to show you is you can get really good interpretations off of these. So, for example, what do we find in these this particular chart? We find a conjunction between Barbara McClintock, actually born in 1902. She's not the same age, but we find her Uranus was lined up with Prince's Saturn. And if we click on that, we get an interpretation. And these are just very well written. There's no time to go into all the details of it, but you can suss out how the aspects come together in these comparisons and get a really good interpretation. You can list them all. Of course, you can do the aspect grid as well, but I didn't mean to go into quite so much detail there. So I now have the new moon back on the screen. But anyway, just to mention, so TimePassages is putting on, Astrograph really is putting on sale the Relationship Insights package and also relationship reports that you can get off the software. If we were looking at that chart, you can also bring everything together in terms of a comparison report, compatibility report, and that lists all of the connections between the two charts. Sun with Jupiter, Sun opposition Saturn, and so on. So just to give you a little bit of a... And I'll put the new moon back. So I think I covered everything that I wanted to talk about with this new moon. There may be questions. Do we have anybody? Oh, we do have a couple of questions, so we'll take those, and then we'll be signing off. What do we got? This is Leslie Benson, who is our trusted...
Hello, everyone.
Facilitator, producer of these live broadcasts.
The first question is from Karen. She asks, regarding Jupiter changing signs to Sagittarius in November, will it expand our quest for peace and love during its transit?
Well, that's a good question. So we talked about how Jupiter is sitting there in Scorpio and making an inconjunct aspect to natal Eris. But of course, the other side of that coin is that Jupiter is going to keep moving and will cross eventually into its own sign. And when will that happen? The next station is at 24 degrees of Sag, so it'll happen pretty soon. You can actually, in the TimePassages software, animate. I could do like a week at a time, and we'd see pretty quickly, I think. There we go. So sometime around the beginning of November, I guess I wasn't prepared with that date, so I'm not real sure, but it looks like it's between November 6th and November 12th. So that is very interesting, of course. It is definitely after the 6th. So there we go. It's around November 8th, actually, that it crosses into Sag. And here we are back at the new moon chart. So yeah, the question that was asked was, what's that going to be like when we have Jupiter in its own sign? Will that bring feelings of peace and love? And I'd have to say that really the retrograde of Venus is important. The fact that Venus is going to be moving backward let's go back to that chart, actually. That was kind of interesting. See, we can go just forwards a week at a time. Now here we're looking at the chart for November 12th. And at this point, Venus has moved back into the last degrees of Libra, getting ready to turn around. If I right-click, it'll say when. Its current retrograde will last until the 16th, that's right. So another couple of days more. And I think that this is more significant in terms of what's happening in the zeitgeist. So to just say, well, gee, Jupiter's going to be in Sagittarius, that's wonderful. That is wonderful, sure. And then the other thing we want to remember is that when Jupiter moves into Sagittarius, it will be squaring Chiron, which is at the very tail end of Pisces. And it will also be, I'm sorry, it won't be squaring Chiron, it'll be trine to Chiron, and it'll also be making an inconjunct to Uranus at the tail end of Aries, and these are going to be in a semi-sextile connection with each other. So that is one thing that I wanted to mention, actually. And then we noticed that Venus is going to be hanging around at the sign, at the degree rather, of Libra that it stations at, which is, it goes back to 25 Libra and 15 minutes. So it goes back another quarter of a degree, sitting here stationary in the sky opposite Uranus. And this particular day I happened to pick of the 12th also has the moon involved, but in any case, the axis of the south node and the north node, the nodal axis, is also going to be square to this. So I don't know. I think this is a pretty still a pretty dicey time for us, because things are going to be kind of up in the air. Things are going to be changing. Relationship issues are still be very much at the fore, and we're going to have a bit of Chiron emphasized as well. So I think we could say that the middle of November is not going to be an easy time. On the other hand, I think we could very well say that, let me put it back, that eventually, yes, Jupiter's going to be in Sag for a whole year. And after these midterm elections, and after things settle down a little bit more by the end of the year, we're still in that, these years leading up to 2020 are just all very intense. In January of 2020, Saturn and Pluto come together for the first time in a conjunction, and then there's a triple conjunction later in the year of 2020 by November, and then we have the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction on the 21st of December of 2020 at 0 degrees of Aquarius. And these are just all very, we're in the middle of huge societal transformation, and look at the condition of the environment right now. The environmental movement is kind of stalled. I mean, the whole climate change issue is being ducked in some circles, and it should be paid attention to. It's a fact. It's happening. So these are not easy times, no matter how you look at it. Now, the fact that Jupiter is not going to be in Scorpio any longer, when Jupiter entered Scorpio was the beginning of the Me Too movement. So Jupiter entering into Sagittarius, I would think, would have a beneficial effect on the way we see things. In other words, maybe things will get a little bit more straightened out. People will be able to acknowledge maybe more directly some of the truth of this, and be able to make adjustments accordingly, and maybe we can actually start to heal this issue in this country, which is a huge issue. But it's not an easy time, no matter that Jupiter is going to be in Sag. So that was kind of a long answer to a question, but what was the other question?
The other question is from Sandy. She asks, did Prince's chart reflect his exit?
Oh, well, that's interesting, because, that's a good question to ask. When Prince died, I believe it was April 21st. Does that ring a bell for you?
I can Google it.
Okay, thank you. I think it was April 21st, and I did notice there's a lot of Jupiter.
Yeah, April 21st, 2016.
And the thing is, why do you see Jupiter in a death chart? Question. I think the answer is because it's a long journey. I mean, my belief system includes the idea that there's a soul, that we go on to another incarnation. however you look at it, well, unless you look at it as a cessation of experience, which many materialistic people in the past, maybe not so much anymore, have felt that to be the case, that this is all there is. And if that's your belief system, it's a little bleak, isn't it? It's like, well, I might as well get as many toys as I can because after I die, it's all over. But having a belief that something goes on after death, I think, is important. And I think astrology actually lends itself to thinking in terms of that, because we know that we can talk in terms of soul connection, we can talk in terms of past life experience when we're looking at the chart. Depending, it can be used in any way you want, astrology, but there are ways that astrology can support a belief that in reincarnation and the soul goes on. And another thing that supports that belief, to my way of thinking, is that oftentimes you see Jupiter in a death chart. Oftentimes. So I'm not sure how Jupiter came out in this particular chart, because I'm just remembering, oh yeah, there's Jupiter when I looked at it. Maybe it was with these other planets that I've been working with, you know, the other trans-Neptunians. Can't remember now what I was thinking about. Oh, okay. So Haumea, it turns out, was transiting in conjunction with his natal Jupiter at that time. So I guess one answer to that question is, well, if you don't take these new trans-Neptunian planets, Haumea, Makemake, as well as Eurus, into account, there's maybe not as much Jupiter, and maybe you could find other Jupiter indicators in here. Jupiter was at the top of his chart, of course. It was in the 10th house. But that is an interesting, to me, that's an interesting position, because Haumea is no stranger to Prince's chart. Haumea is very prominent in Prince's chart, as you can see if you look into it here. And I've talked about that, as it's in my talk on the new planets that I talk about Prince. But anyway, you can see that if Haumea was an important planet for his chart in the transiting positions, at the time of his death, it was only half a degree off of a conjunction to his natal Jupiter. And like I say, Jupiter is oftentimes prominent in a death chart, as it turns out. So I guess that's all I'll say about that at the moment.
One more question?
Sure.
All right. Alexis is wondering if you plan to do any further enhancements to the Mobile Pro app.
Yes, we are. The first enhancement we're going to do actually doesn't involve the iPhone. We're coming out with an Android version very, very soon, by the end of the year. And we're really excited about it. We're going to be able to, at the very beginning, cover all the functionality of the iPhone mobile app, and then we'll try to start improving the functionality of both of those. We have to figure out, for $30 on the iPhone, that's what you get, is kind of the way it is. We have many more features on the desktop, of course. And we've thought about trying to include more features into the mobile, but there becomes sort of an economic question as to how we charge for those. We could do in-app purchases within the iPhone. So we're still wrestling with those questions, but we do want to add more features. It seems like the platform can support more features like composite charts, solar return charts, being able to adjust the aspect orbs. Those would be things we'd be looking at. But first we have to get the Android to come up to the functionality of the iPhone, and then we'll be changing both of them after that. Any other questions we had? Well, good. Okay, well, we did a little marketing today, as well as some astrology, so that's nice. We are here to help, and we really want to spread the news about astrology far and wide, because we feel this whole company that work with me, there's 5 people that are in the dedicated inner circle and 2 others that are contractors with us. We feel that it's very important to get astrology out there and to have people recognize that, you know, it's not as simple as a materialistic universe as you might think. The astrology works. It's very helpful to individuals to understand their own individual path, you know, what their destiny may be, or what their possibilities are, is another way to put it. I don't believe in fate. I believe you have to earn what you get, you know, but they're fated possibilities that you have in your chart that show up in the chart. And so this is our mission. We really want people to recognize that, and that's why the iPhone is so important as well, because it's so easy to demonstrate in this device you can just keep in your pocket. So we want to be on the other 50% of the mobile platform, which is the Android platform, and we're getting there. And then, yeah, we just want to get the word out and have it be a big factor in this changing society that we're in the midst of, to introduce a certain degree of a spiritual component. That's what we want to see. So let me switch back to the other way and just say a few words in closing. Yeah, this is this is about the amount of time we wanted to spend. So it's nice being with you, and thanks for your questions. And see you next time. Have a good couple of weeks. Bye now.